Before we start, this video is sponsored by Moon Milk, which is a healthy spice mix that I created with my family. It helps you relax, focus and sleep better. Check the links in the description. So in this video I want to talk about one of the most common, or arguably the most common reason why you are stuck with your thematic analysis. So very often when you reach out to me, what happens is you tell me that you have done some coding, or usually a lot of coding. Very often you feel like you are done with your codes, but then you're stuck and you're not sure how to develop themes, what to do next with all these codes. Very often it's a big number of codes, which is a good thing, as I always explain in many videos that I have about coding. It's always good to have lots and lots of codes because they will help you organize your data, sort your data, and specifically see the themes, decide on the themes that you need for your final results. You do end up, however, very often in a situation where you have lots of codes, like I said. However, you just don't know what to do next, what these themes are they going to emerge somehow, are they going to reveal themselves to you, or else if not, then how do we decide what these themes are going to be? And the problem here, so this is the main problem. The problem here is that in all these situations share one characteristic. When I talk to you and I ask you about your results and your data, in all these cases, you do not know and you have not decided what the core of your findings is. So remember, when I often say that the results are basically telling a story, that we're creating a story, that we're creating some kind of a narrative, and therefore it's absolutely essential that you decide what that narrative is going to be, what the core of your story is going to be, so that around that core, around these themes, you can organize other themes, you can organize these main themes that you decide to be the core of your story. But there is absolutely physically no way to do this without having made that decision. So that's the thing. You cannot expect that you have lots of codes and then somehow it will become evident to you what the key themes are. I mean, to some extent it does, because that's why we sort all that data. That's why we reduce the volume of our data by creating codes, to be able to see these themes a little bit clearer than you would be able to see without the codes. But at the end of the day, and I always say that you are responsible for generating themes. So based on these codes, you have to decide, based on these codes, based on the research questions, you have to decide what is it that I want to communicate? What is it that I found from this data, that I learned from this data, and therefore, how do I organize this response? How do I organize this story and this narrative? So that's the key decision, because you have lots of codes and it's simply overwhelming to decide. It's not possible to decide which codes are relevant, which codes are going to be deleted. And another thing that I often say is that you will delete loads of codes. You absolutely have to delete lots of codes. Many of you say, I don't want to delete codes, or I'm anxious because I may need to delete codes, or what do I do if these codes don't seem to be relevant? It's absolutely normal and in fact desirable, and it will be very surprising if you did not delete any codes. You will have to delete plenty of codes, but you can only do this once you have decided on that core of the story. So what is it that you're going to base the whole story, the whole response and the whole report of your findings around? So to give you some examples, in a second I'll switch to NVivo and I'll show you an example from a data set. But imagine, for example, a study about COVID, the COVID-19 pandemic, maybe nurses' experiences in the pandemic. And imagine you have, for example, lots and lots of codes describing different emotions like anxiety and fear and stress and sadness and all kinds of emotions. Now, let's imagine you have 15 or 20 of these different emotions, these codes describing emotions, as well as other codes, of course, lots of other codes. But the thing is, so what do you do with these emotions, codes, with the codes describing emotions? It's just an example of this kind of thing that happens a lot, as I said, when I work with you in our private sessions to unblock your analysis. So what do you do with these emotions codes? Again, there is no way to decide what to do with them without having decided what the key point will be. the key point of your findings, your analysis. So if, for example, the emotions are important, so you do want to distinguish between the different emotions, maybe even your research question is what kind of emotions the pandemic evokes in nurses working in a specific hospital. Or maybe it's not even in the research question, but you do care about these different emotions. It's your finding. This is important. In that case, of course, you want to keep these codes. You want to keep the emotions codes, maybe create a theme called, the kind of emotions evoked by the COVID-19 pandemic. In which case, it would be nice to list the different emotions that you have. So in that case, you're keeping these codes describing the emotions. However, in a different scenario, perhaps you're not interested in listing all these different emotions. Perhaps it's not that relevant, not that important to you. What is important, however, is that you're focusing in your study, you're focusing on the impact of the pandemic on nurses. There may be financial impact, there may be something else. And just one of these types of impact describes, let's say, psychological impact or negative impact on psychological, mental well-being. In that case, I don't think you need all these emotions and list them separately, because it's simply not the key point that you're trying to make. In that case, if you're using software or not using software, you want to merge all these codes. You don't need 15 or 20 different codes describing different emotions, but rather just one code or sub-theme of a theme that says, like I said, the negative impact of the pandemic. And this sub-theme you'll name it something like what I already said. So negative impact on psychological well-being or something like that. So you don't need, so this is how different these two scenarios became. And both of these are just based on your judgment as to how you're going to organize the findings. And it's not always just about deleting or merging, so the decision to delete or merge the codes. It's also very much, as you'll see an example in NVivo that I'll show you in a second, it's very much about renaming the themes, deciding what it is that you see or you want to show in this particular extract. So to give you a different example now, imagine in your study the students are talking about all kinds of motivations, why they decided to study at this particular university. So you're asking students, international students maybe, about their experiences, and they are really keen on telling you about their motivation. So they tell you about for somebody or for a number of participants, the key motivation was were the networking opportunities that the university provides. For somebody, it was the location. They wanted to stay in a beautiful location in an international city where there are many international students. For somebody, of course, it was more instrumental, and they decided to study here because of the high quality of education, because it's a reputable institution, because there are good teachers. So these are the key motivations. So of course, it's easy if you are in fact interested in listing their motivation. Maybe your study is asking about the motivations that students have for studying at this particular university. However, imagine that this is not the key point, or this is not the key thing you want to organize your findings around, because maybe you were asked to find out about their perceived challenges and benefits of this institution. So maybe that was a kind of a needs analysis study where you were interested to see what are the challenges that they face and what are the perceived benefits. So how they see the benefits or advantages of this institution. So what do you do now? You may feel like panicking because you don't really have many codes about the benefits. You do have plenty about the motivations just because they were happy to talk about it. Or maybe you changed your research questions sometime midway, and therefore you were asking at the time questions that were about motivations, but then you decided with your supervisors that this is not going to be the main research question. But here in this example, again, there is no need to panic, because in this example, all you need to do is kind of rework and recycle, if you like, the codes that you already have. So for example, if I have all these different codes about the motivations, however, I'm not really interested in that, but I'm interested in the perceived advantages and benefits of that institution, you can easily imagine how I can rename and change some of these motivations into perceived benefits. So if somebody's motivation is to study at a reputable institution, then it's of course the perceived advantage of the institution. They believe it's a high quality, reputable institution. If for somebody the key motivation was to increase their qualifications, knowledge, and again, because of the high quality of this teaching, then again, you see it's right there, high quality of teaching is a perceived benefit, or good teachers. As I said before, somebody wants to be surrounded with good teachers and professors that are recognized worldwide. Again, it's a perceived benefit of the institution, as well as the fact that it provides networking opportunities for international students, which was another motivation that they mentioned. So you can see that I wouldn't be able to do that if I didn't decide first what is it that I'm going to focus on. So in the first example, it was very important. Do I need all these emotions? Or is it enough just to say that emotional, there is an impact on psychological well-being? In the second example, I have to decide what is it that I'm looking at. Do I need all these motivations, or do I want to make something different out of these motivations? So in all cases, it's absolutely, like I said, physically impossible to reach that point if you haven't first internalized that response and decided these are my findings, this is what I'm focusing on. And now finally, I want to show you an example. This is an example, a practice data set that you may know from some of my other videos, just to demonstrate the same points further, basically. So the study is about barriers to mental health access and provision. People in this specific imaginary context do not get access or do not seek help. We don't know. What are the barriers? We want to know what's happening. Why are they not seeking help? So we have lots of codes. Let's just look at initial codes. Don't worry about NVivo if you're not using this software. But the point is, we have lots of codes. Not really that many. I would normally have lots of codes. This is an example data set. But we have codes that we have to eventually put into groups and decide what we're going to do with these codes. So again, focus coding is the second stage. You can see my other videos in which I explain the whole process. In the second stage, I kind of organize the codes into good stuff and obstacles. So just to be able to see more or less what I have in the data. But now, and here is the decision. What is it that I'm going to focus on? Again, so if I want to focus in my thematic framework on ways to improve access, so that's the imaginary research question. How to improve, what are the barriers? How to improve access? So ways to improve access, let me just switch to my thematic framework. So mental health service and availability, ways to improve it. It will determine what I'll do with some of my codes. So specifically look here, and we have reading books, reading online materials, and what else? Where is it? Learning about the condition from the TV, right? So as you can see, there are lots of references, lots of quotes, lots of extracts for these things. Some people told me or the researcher that these things helped. These things helped. I understood my condition. I understood I need to seek help. So of course, it's relevant for our study. However, because we're focusing on ways to improve mental health service and availability, so this is the decision I made. These are the themes I want to use. Barriers, don't worry about that. So some barriers, effects of mental health, and additional finding. But here are ways to improve mental health service. How do we use this to create sub-themes for ways to improve mental health service availability? It doesn't make any sense. We can't just say read more books. Remember, we have to create themes and sub-themes that are just possible to implement, something that will enable us to talk about the implications, practical implications. This is not a good recommendation, read more books, because how are you going to achieve that? However, because it's a big thing in the data, I have lots of codes about this. I didn't want to just lose it, just throw it away. So based on that, I made a decision. I started to think, okay, what are the things, what do they have in common? What happened here in a way that I can shape it as a recommendation for improving mental health service availability. So what I did here, you'll see, this is the one that these three codes became. So again, have a look here: reading books, reading online materials, watching TV, learning from TV. All of them are about raising awareness of the condition. So based on that, I remember, you're in charge of your data. Based on that, I decided, okay, all of these things increased these people's awareness. So let's if we're to make this thematic framework as something that includes recommendations, something we can act on, raising awareness is what happened here. So, and then of course, when I talk about it, I will discuss how for different people, TV, books, internet were source of information. Therefore, we need to perhaps think of ways to raise awareness. So that's how I kind of recycle that. But then in version 2, so now I'll show you a different approach based on the same data, based on the same codes. This time I decided I want to go with barriers, effects, just the same, and then factors that benefit mental health, access and provision. So it's a different wording, it's a different thing. Factors, it's not ways to improve, so it's not for us to act on, it's about factors that benefit. So of course we will act on it in a way as well, but you can see the difference. In that case, I decided to further divide this into external and internal factors, where external, for example, could be support from family and things like that, support from doctors and things like that. And then in the internal factors, I actually kept the same stuff. These are internal, these are kind of personal things and practices and strategies. For this narrative, for this story, where I'm focusing on internal factors, internal practices, personal practices that help to achieve that awareness, help to potentially benefit access and provision, it just fits this narrative. It makes sense to say reading books, internet and all that. Possibly later in the discussion or maybe implications, I will still talk about some kind of awareness that increases as a result of it. But for the thematic framework, it actually fits my thematic framework because I made a decision. This is how I'll present my findings. And here in the first version, this is how I present my findings. So in which case I did have to change things in the wording on my themes and sub-themes, and I did have to do some merging as well. So this is everything that I wanted to tell you. I hope that you get my point. You absolutely have to have this idea. You have to have this narrative and this story in mind first to unblock that data analysis. If you have lots of codes, there is absolutely no way to decide which ones are relevant if you haven't decided that for yourself. You have to create that story, decide what are the key points, what are the core points, the core findings around which you will organize the results chapter or whatever it is that you're working on. And only this way you can continue. Without it, you'll be going in circles. You will never know what to delete, what not to delete. You will never be able to make that decision. So remember that I offer private tutorials as well. If you're really stuck, feel free to reach out through my website and the provided email address, as well as if you struggle with any other aspects of qualitative research implementation or planning. I hope that you learned something new. Please like the video if you have, share it, comment underneath, and let others know if you know somebody who can benefit from this instruction.